Hey, what's up everyone? This is Yoan and welcome to another quilt along episode. Today we're gonna make this really cute child quilt. I call this quilt I Spy Stars and Cars. I made this quilt actually as a birthday present for my son that is turning 3 years old in just a few days. So he's so much into vehicles and spacecraft. That's why I chose these fabrics. Obviously, feel free to do different theme according to what your child or your grandchild or whoever it is you're making the quilt for, whatever they're interested in. The finished measurements of this quilt is approximately 47.5 inch by 61.5 inch. Although I designed this quilt for children, the size I think is decent enough to make a throw size quilt. Obviously, you can enlarge the size of the quilt by adding more blocks or by enlarging the size of the border. So feel free to improvise if you need to. For this quilt, we're gonna use two different blocks. So the first block will be this 8-point star block. It's pretty simple and you're probably already very familiar with this. We're gonna work on this block with half square triangles, and for the next block we're gonna do a simple 3-patch block. So we will add sashing. I use all the fabrics for the quilt top from Joann, and for the backing I use this super soft and cuddly Shannon Minky fabric. So I love it and I think it's really great for kids because they love anything snuggly and cuddly. I got this fabric from Amazon. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial, and without further ado, let's get started. For this project, you're gonna need 4 different fabrics: one dark, one medium, one light, and one background fabric. To make the block number 1 or the star block, you will need to cut the following pieces. We're gonna use panel 1 and 2 or the 4.5 inch squares to make the half square triangles. Now lay out panel 1 and 2 right side together. And then you want to take your ruler and lay that on diagonal angle. And then go ahead and draw the diagonal line. You can either use a fabric marker, pencil, or pen. Once you've done that, go ahead and sew 1/4 inch away from the diagonal line on both sides. Now I'm going to pop a couple of pins to secure them in place. I'm sewing with my 1/4 inch foot, so I simply align the edges of my presser foot with the diagonal line. And once you've done sewing, you want to cut the diagonal line and you should end up with 2 half square triangles. Press the seams of one of the half square triangle towards the darker fabric and press the other one towards the light fabric. Trim the half square triangle off to measure 3.5 inch squares. So here's my square ruler and here is the 3.5 inch point. Align the diagonal line of the ruler with the diagonal line of the half square triangle. So first I'm going to cut just a slight bigger than the measurements that I'm aiming for. So as you can see here, I'm aligning my ruler at the 3 3/4 inch point, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim. Now I'm going to rotate this to the opposite side, again aligning the diagonal line of the ruler with the diagonal line of the half square triangle. And this time I'm going to measure exactly at 3.5 inch point and trim off the excess. Now go ahead and do the same with the other piece. So you should end up with 8 half square triangles, and as you can see here, I divided them according to the pressing direction. Now you can assemble the 8-point star block just like shown here, alternating the half square triangles according to the pressing direction. This way you can easily nest the seams later. Now piece the block with 1/4 inch of seam allowance starting from the first row. Press the seams at the center towards one side, doesn't matter to which direction, and press the seams of both sides towards the panel 4 or the white fabric. Now we're gonna sew these two together. Again, you should be able to nest the seams. Now press the seams towards one side, or you can also press the seams open, whichever your preference is. Now we're gonna sew the opposite side. Now go ahead and sew the third row. We're gonna sew and press this the same way we did with the first row. Now we're gonna sew the side panel here with the center square or panel 3. Then press towards the center. Now sew the opposite side. Again, pressing the seams towards the center. Now sew the first and the second row together. You should be able to nest the seams if you follow the pressing instruction, and you can also pop a couple of pins to secure them in place. Press the seams towards the first row. Now go ahead and sew the third row. And press the seams towards the third row. Now we're gonna sew panel 5 and 6 or the sashing strips. So go ahead and lay them out just like shown here. And then sew starting from panel 5 or the shorter strips. And then press towards panel 5 or towards the sashing. Alright, so our first block is done, and if everything lays flat, your blocks should measure 14.5-inch squares. So go ahead and make 6 of these. Now we're gonna work on the block number 2, which is pretty simple. It's a 3-patch block with sashing. So go ahead and prepare your panel pieces. And then lay them out just like shown here. Now sew them together with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. For this block, you can press the seams to any direction. Now lay out panel 6 and 7. And then go ahead and sew starting from panel 6 or the shorter strip. And then press towards panel 6. Alright, so block number 2 is done, and you should end up with something like this. And the same as block number 1, this should measure 14.5-inch squares. So go ahead and make 6 of these. Once you've done piecing your blocks, go ahead and lay them out in 4 rows and 3 columns just like shown here. Now feel free to improvise and change the layout the way you want to. And once you're happy with the layout, go ahead and sew the blocks together one row at a time. Press the seams of each row towards opposite direction. This way you can nest the seams when sewing the rows together later. Once the blocks of each row are sewn, go ahead and sew the rows together, starting from the first row with the second row. Cut the border 3 inches wide or as desired. I use fabric A for my border. And then sew the borders starting from border 1 or the shorter border. So I like to match the center point of the border with the center point of the quilt top and then pin them in place. And then I'm going to pin both of the side edges as well. And then sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Here I've already sewn my borders and my quilt top is done and ready to go. Now I'm going to layer this with the batting and the backing fabric and hop over to my sewing machine again to do the quilting. I free motioned this quilt with simple stippling design. I think this is the simplest form of free motion quilting. Obviously, you can quilt this in any design that you desire. You can also quilt this with your walking foot, or you can do hand quilting. Once you've done quilting, go ahead and trim off the excess batting and backing. I use this lint roller here to clean up the shading from the minky fabric when I make a cut. Now finish your quilt by binding it with your favorite binding method. And that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time with another fun sewing and quilting project. Goodbye!